Rav Sofer had a son named Reb Shimon Sofer, who was the Rav in Erloy. He was known to be a very big tzaddik, a chassidu, prisha, somebody who shunned all worldly pleasures, was a yoshev b'tainis, was a mesagit, a heilige yid. When he was a young bacher, he did a shidduch with the daughter of Reb Chaim Shmuel Birnbaum. Reb Chaim Shmuel Birnbaum was the son-in-law of Reb Kiva Eger. Reb Kiva Eger took him, I think it was his youngest son-in-law. Reb Kiva Eger was nifter when the son-in-law was 23 years old. This is a goyin oilam, Reb Chaim Shmuel Birnbaum. He was a pshitcha chassid actually. And his father was one of the wealthiest Yidden in all of Russia. And they were known as the Rothschilds of Russia. And there's a lot of stories about their wealth too, but ein kan mekoyma. When Reb Shimon Sofer became an Edom, the says by Reb Kiva Eger's son-in-law, was a cousin of his, because he was also an Einik of Reb Kiva Eger. He came into a very, very wealthy home. And it was quite an extravagant lifestyle, and he lived in a very opulent mansion, and there were servants who served with white gloves, and he wasn't accustomed to it, he wasn't used to it, and he felt it was disturbing his avodas Hashem. After about a half a year of living there, he said to his wife, I can't take it anymore. I'm losing my dveikis, and I can't serve the Rebbeinu Shalom properly in such surroundings. We have to leave from here. His wife said, I'm not leaving home. This is where I was brought up. I don't want to give up my family. And he begged her. And finally he said, look, if you don't come with me, we're going to have to end the marriage with a get. And she was expecting a child at this time. And she said no, she refuses to come. And the decision was made. He gave her a get, and he left. And he went back home, he remarried, he had a mishpacha, and he never told his family that he was once married before. His Gerusha married, she remarried the Lemberger Goyim, the base Yitzchak, Yitzchak Shmelkes, one of the greatest poiskim and the greatest poiskim in the generation. And this child was born, and he grew up thinking that his name is Shmelkes, that he's a son of the base Yitzchak. He never knew where he came from. As he grew older, it came time to look for a shidduch for him. The base Yitzchak called him in and said, I want to tell you something. As your name is not Shmelkes, but you come from a very heilige mishpacha. You're an Einik of the Chassam Sofer, and your father is the famous Eloy Rav, Reb Shimon Sofer, the son of the Ksav Sofer. And he was very shocked. He was taken aback. He didn't know how to deal with the news. And he said, before you start out in Shidduchim and going out into the world, I wanted you to know where you come from. So he asked him, do you give me a reshus to go search for my family? I'd like to meet them. He said, of course. You're right, you should go. And so he embarked on a journey. He was a wealthy boy, and he stayed in the finest hotels. And he made a stop in Vienna. And there he stayed in a nice hotel, but there was nowhere to eat. So he searched out for a kosher restaurant in Vienna. And there was a restaurant, and he came in, and all the tables were taken. There was nowhere to sit. And he went, there was a maitre d' over there who was in charge. He said, could you find me a table? I need a table. He said, well, there's nothing available. He said, look, in the corner there's a yid sitting there all by himself. Maybe he doesn't mind to have company. He says, fine, I'll check. He goes over, he comes back. Yeah, he said, it's okay, you can sit down. He goes and sits down. The yid says, Shalom Aleichem, what's your name? He says, believe me, I'm not sure anymore. He says, till now I thought my name was Shmelkes, and now I find out my name is Sofer, or Schreiber as they were known. He says, your name is Schreiber? Your name is Sofer? What do you mean, from which family? He says, well, I've been told I'm the son of Reb Shimon Sofer, the Baal Hisoidus L'Tshuva. He wrote a Sefer, the Tzaddik, their lawyer Rav. And he says, what? You're talking about my father? You're a son of Reb Shimon Sofer? What's going on over here? He says, look, I'm not sure myself, but let me tell you the story. And he tells him the whole Maaseh. And he says, our father never told us that we had a brother. He never told us that he had been married before, but I have to check it out. So he sent a telegram back to Eloi, and he got back a telegram. It says, Aleph Emes, it's all true, bring him immediately. And so he came. I heard this story from Rav Moshe Weiss in Yerushalayim, was the Mechutna of the Kloizer Rebbe, who heard it directly from another brother, another child of Reb Shimon Sofer, lived in Yerushalayim, and he heard the story from the family firsthand. A fascinating story. There's one point I want to take out of it, besides the story. In the Yemei Yaldus, a person can live not knowing who he is. When it comes time to accomplish, when it comes time to go out and begin doing what we have to do, the first, most fundamental knowledge, the most critical awareness a person has to have: who am I? What am I? Where do I come from? What's my shoirish? And this is a question every single Yid has to ask himself, and he has to know the answer, because the answer is such a powerful answer. The answer is, it says, Mefurish in the Torah, Bonim Atem Lashem Elokeichem. We are children of the Rabbeinu Shalom. The Rabbeinu Shalom is unser Tate, and we are his children. And the Mishnah tells us, Chavivin Yisrael, Yisrael are precious, Shenikru Bonim Lamokoim, Chibo Yiseira Noidas Lohem. An extra measure of love was given by telling them that they are bonim lamokim, as it says in the pasuk, bonim atem l'Hashem Elokeinu. It wasn't enough just that we are bonim, but the Eibishter, in his enormous love for us, he expressed it to us and told us and gave us the idea. Rabbi Wachsman explains it with a beautiful marshal. He says, imagine you got two poor people, two aniyim, two beggars, and they're rummaging through the garbage looking for what to eat. And one of them has got under the oven in his house, in his hovel, he doesn't know about it, there's a buried treasure full of gold and silver. But he doesn't know that it's there. For all practical purposes, he's in the same situation as his chaver. They're both aniyim merudim, they're both beggars. Because if you have a treasure, it only has value if you know you've got it. If you don't know you have it, you're just as poor. It's not enough that we're bonim lamokim. If we have a mila, we have to know about it. We have to be aware, we have to be conscious of it, we have to internalize this fact into our being that we are bonim lamokim. And if we don't know our roots, we don't know who we are, we don't know from where we come from, there's a sakona, there's a danger. I remember once being together with a group of younger life. We had a chaver in Eretz Yisrael who needed help to get married, and we raised a sizable amount of money, a few $1,000s, to help him get married. And we were looking for a shliach, for a messenger to take the money to Eretz Yisrael. And that Shabbos in Lakewood, there was a simcha, and I knew that there was somebody leaving from the simcha, a friend of mine, a bacher, who was going to Eretz Yisrael. So I went to him by Shalashudis, and I said, look, you're leaving, please could you take a lot of money? He knew also the chaver. He said, sure, I'll be glad to take it. It was a big achrayis, it's a lot of money, it was cash. Fine. I said, I want to see if I can get it all together before you leave. He says, fine, if you come, it's good. If not, it's very good. I ran home, and I came back, and I saw him standing there in the hallway, and I gave him the envelope. I said, here, take it to this and this address. 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, Garnish, I don't hear anything. The money never arrived. I call him up and say, what happened? He says, what? You never gave me an envelope of money. He says, I was waiting for you to come. Where were you? I said, well, who was the fellow who I gave the money to? He says, that must have been my brother. I have a brother who looks very much like me. So I said, well, get hold of him. He says, money doesn't know. In that suit, I gave that suit to the cleaners. And the money was lost forever. It never came back. He was walking around with an envelope full of thousands of dollars, but he didn't know. He didn't know what he had. You can imagine you walking around with that type of money. The Gemara says, you're tapping, and he was going, and he's walking, he's on the plane, he's throwing his coat up and down, in the hanger, off the hanger, on top, without even paying a blind bit of notice that there's a small fortune in there, and he comes, he's a little bit sweated, this has to go to the cleaner, sends it off to the cleaners, and somebody made a pretty penny on this, don't know till this day where the money ended up, but if you don't know you've got a treasure, you're in danger of losing that mila. So it is so important, it's critical that we know, that we be aware and we understand the meaning of being Bonim Atem L'Hashem Elokeichem. What does it mean to have a Yiddish neshama? What is the greatness, what is the godless of Nishmas Yisrael? The Heilige Mizritcha Magid in the Sefer Torah HaMagid gives a marshal. He says, imagine someone who's building a magnificent palace. So the first thing he has in his mind's eye, or maybe even makes a diagram, he makes a picture, a beautiful picture of what this palace is going to look like. And then he begins to work. He buys the land, and he gets the workers, and he plows the field, and he digs up the stones, and they're digging, and they're pouring foundations, and you have to order parts and materials and labor. And every step of the way, he has nachas because he thinks of what is going to be standing here one day. He has that picture in his mind of the beautiful palace, and this is what gives him chizik the entire long process while he's building, because he knows there's going to be something magnificent going to be standing here. Zog the Heilige Mezritcha Magid. When the Rabbi Shalom created the world, he had Kaviyachal B'Ritzoynoi, Kaviyachal in his mind a tzir. The picture, the palace was a Yiddish neshama, Nishmas Yisrael. And everything that went into Bria So'ilam, from the mountains to the valleys, to the streams, to the rivers, to the billions upon billions of stars, each one stationed millions of light years away from another, to the millions of species of insects and fish and balechai, and the oilamois, and the malachim, ruchniim, and the madreges, madreges. All of this, the Rabbi Shalom was mishtashea in their creation, because the ultimate goal was to achieve Nishmas Yisrael, to create one Yiddishkin, to create our Neshama. The Avei Nachal writes in Parshas Vayetze, before the Rabbi Shalom created this world, and the Tachlis, the purpose of all of the Briyas, that Yidden should serve the Rabbi Shalom. First, who created worlds upon worlds, Elyonim, Ruchniim, spiritual, luminous worlds and holy spheres, l'revavos, tens upon tens of thousands, kulam kidoshin, shemois hakodesh, names of the Rabbeinu Shalom, effable names, ineffable names, madregos kidoshos, v'chulam nosnu achakach b'nishmas isha Yisraeli. He took all of this and he infused it, he placed it into a Yiddish neshama. And so says the Nefesh HaChaim, in Nefesh HaChaim, Shar Aleph Perik Vov. And this Yisoid is repeated again and again throughout our Sfarim HaKadoshim, the Morenaim and Parshas Bereishis. He writes the Iker Bria of all the Olamos and all the Torahs with a Kavanah of Soif Masa. The Kavanah was Yisrael. Because Hashem Yisbarach is Misaneg. He delights with our service of Him. V'avodas Yisrael. The Eden who are melubashim, who are clothed in a gashmius dikabeged, who have a guf, he delights in that far more. Yoiser mitanuk shemis aneg me'avodas hamalochim v'chayos v'afanei hakodesh. The Rabbeinu Shalom has a far greater delight and hano and tainug and enjoyment from our avodah, from krutzei choymer, from basa v'dam, from flesh and blood, and this brings him a tainug that's far greater than that he gets al yidei the avodah of the malachim. She'ein l'cho tainug sheyesh l'boire gadol mizeh. There's no greater tainug for the Rabbeinu Shalom than the avodah of Klal Yisrael. This is Kedusha of a Neshama of Yisrael. The Balatanya writes in Igeres HaKodesh, when 10 Yidden get together, 10 Yiddish Neshamas, even if they're not speaking Divrei Torah, they're just standing together, the Lashon of the Balatanya is that if a Malach were to come between these 10 Yidden, it would fall on him a mosav of fachat, such a powerful fright and a terror, b'ligvul v'tachlus, and ad shehoya mizbatel mi metzius legamri, he would cease to exist from the pachad of the kedusha of Yiddish neshamas, of 10 Yiddish neshamas together, even when they're not speaking divrei Torah. So we're talking about our neshama, the neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to a Yiddish kind, or the neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives to one who becomes a Yiddish kind. The Ger Tzedek also gets this level. One who is zoichet to have a Nishmas Yisrael is carrying with him the center and the purpose and the tachlis of all of the Bria. Where does this neshama come from? Zog the Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Aleph Perek Hey, and he uses words and terms that are way beyond our comprehension, that are in Yonim of Kabbalah, which we do not understand. However, even a superficial touch to hear what the words are can give us an idea of what it is that we don't understand. Sometimes we have to know what we don't understand. The Nefesh HaChaim, the world is created in layers of worlds, zeh l'toich zeh. One is inside the previous one. And each world, each olam haruchni, is the neshama of the world that's around it. And inside that world is another olam, and that's the neshama of that one. And that's the neshama of that one. It gets deeper and deeper till you get to the highest olamos of the srofim, the oifanim, the chayos hakodesh. And after that, the neshama, each one of those is the neshama of the previous world. And then you get to the kisei hakavod, which is the neshama of all of those worlds. And the kisei hakavod is atzilus kodsho yizbarach. And the nishmas hachayim shel hakisei. What's the neshama? What's the chiyas of the kisei hakavod, which is the center of all existence? Hu soid shoyre shel yon shel nishmas Yisrael. That is the place where a Yiddish neshama comes from. Shehu yoyser gavoya u'ma'oid na'lo gamei hakisei. The place, the oyser, where a Yiddish neshama comes from is even greater and deeper and higher than the kisei hakavod itself. And the Baal HaTanya expresses this idea many times throughout Sefer HaTanya. Vayipach ba'apov nishmas chayim. The lashon of the Zohar HaKadosh, man, the nofach mitoichei nofach. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu blew into us our neshama, he was blowing kavayachol from himself. Again, we don't understand what these terms mean, but at least the mashal we can grasp. He blew from within himself, and the Baal HaTanya says it's exactly like a father to a child. Just like a child is genetically connected to his father's fingernails, his hair, everything, the shayrish, the root is in the rotz and in the mayach of the father. So everything that there is about a Yid's neshama, the shayrish of it is the Rabbi Shalom. Bonim atem Lashem kipshutoi. We are actually children. We are the toitzah of Ritzoyna Yizbarach, of Ayipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chayim. The Tzemach Tzedek once gathered together a group of Cantonistan. You know, there was a terrible gezeira in Russia on the Zazar where little children were grabbed, they were kidnapped away and were forced to serve in the Russian army for 25 years, and he told them, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, just like when you inhale and you take a breath, the breath that's inside is part of you, so too your heilige neshamas were part of the Rabbeinu Shalom himself. Man, the nofach mitoichei nofach, you have a chelik elokayim imal, and there's nothing in the world that shares this with us. Not malochim, not koichovim. The Baal HaTanya explains, V'ruach tiv kol tzevorim. All of these entities, all of these creations are only miruach tiv, from the chiyus hachitzonis. Nothing comes from mitoichai. Nowhere else do we find the lashon of vayipach, an inner chiyus, the shemavaya, the inner, the chiyus hapnimi of the Rabbeinu Shalom. That was given only to Klal Yisrael. And the Malachim are Mekana, the Malachim cry, Aye Mekoim Kivoidoi. We would love to be able to do that. We do not have the power to serve the Rabbeinu Shalom from the position that Klal Yisrael does. We are not on their madrega. Imagine if there was a king who had a general who waged brave battles, and he won and he conquered and he brought glory to the king. And the king calls him in, he says, I want to reward you. What is it that you would like? And he opens up his treasure house and he says, take what you would like. And the general says to him, you know, there's one thing I'd love to do. Could I just wear the king's crown for 1 hour? And the king would say, my dear general, you can have whatever you like. I can give you provinces, I can give you palaces, but to wear the king's crown, that you cannot do, that you can't have. And he's begging him, but I served you so devotedly. I was such a dedicated general. I brought such honor to the kingdom. Just let me for once wear the Keser Malchus. Nothing, he can't. And while they're talking, a little boy scurries in, hops onto the king's lap, lifts up the crown, and puts it on his head, and he's giggling, and the king is playing with him. And the general looks, and he sees he runs off, and he runs out, and he's jumping around with the king's crown. He says, Yingula, what's going on? Here I'm standing, I served the king for so long, and I'm begging to be able to wear the crown, and I cannot. And here this little child in the Melech says, he's my child. That's my prince. Whenever he wants, he can put on the crown. A Yiddish Yingula opens up a Mishnayis, and he says, Me'emas Aikoyenes Ashma Ba'arvis. And all of my Olachim are plussing from Kinna. He can wear the Keser Malchus. They beg Nahoit Chal HaShomayim. He can do a mitzvah. He can do a chesed. He can overcome his Kinna. He can smile at a chaver. He can be Mekayim Kibbud Aveim. He can do things that are wearing the Keser Malchus that no Malach has a right to do. This is the gift of Bonim Atem Lashem Alokeichem, that we are princes and princesses. We are of royal blood. We are HaKadosh Baruch Hu's children. And therefore we are privy to the greatest treasures, to the Keser Malchus, to the Torah, to the mitzvahs, something that no malach, no angel could ever dream of coming close to. This is our neshama. And this is where the neshama comes from the Pnimius Chiyus HaKisei. The Panovich Rav once told a story at Yarchikala that he once heard from the Heilige Chofetz Chaim, and the Chofetz Chaim was growing up as a young boy. He lived in a town called Zettel. And in the Zettel town, there was a town buffoon. His name was Koppel. And everybody used to make fun of Koppel. He wasn't very bright. And he was the laughing stock. It used to chep him, In every town there was such a Rachmanis. One day, a famous tobacco company opened up a plant in Grodno, which was a big town and it wasn't far from Zettel. And as a publicity gimmick, they announced that whoever comes to the dedication, to the first day, to the opening of the factory, will receive 2 packages of machrika. Machrika was a very inferior type of snuff. It was the cheapest tobacco you could buy. And Koppel was very excited to get his 2 packets of machrika. So he traveled and he hitchhiked and he slogged through the slush and the snow until he came there. And then he journeyed back and he got back home. And the people were all laughing at him and they say, "No, the Koppel, tell us, how long did it take you to get there?" He said, "It took me 3 days to travel there." He said, "And how long did it take you to get back?" It took me 4 days. The weather, there was problem. I walked 3 days there and 4 days back. The couple, what did you bring back? He says, "What? Look what I brought back. 2 packages of machrika, of the cheapest tobacco that there is." And the Panovich Rav said that the Chofetz Chaim began to weep. And he said, "Rabbi Sai, our neshamas, where did they come from? What a journey. From the Pnimius Chiyus HaKisei. And it was sent down through Oilamus, through Hishtalsh until they finally arrived here. And then we have to travel back and they ask us one thing. What did you bring back? What are we going to show the Rabbeinu Shalom? What did we bring back? A perpetual machrike. A few nourished toys, a little bit of kavod, a little bit of ashiras. What are we to show the Rabbeinu Shalom for this journey? The neshama that comes to us from such a mokim gavoya. When we wake up in the morning, Rabbi say, "Moide ani lefonecha." We thank the Rabbi. When they say the Kotzker Rebbe, after he said "Moide ani lefonecha," he couldn't continue. He couldn't continue. I thought, who was ani? And I thought, who's lefonecha? He couldn't continue. Shechazarto bi nishmasi, what a neshama. Elikai neshama, shenosato bi. We say it every morning. Tahoi rohi. Do you know how Torah it is? The Bermaim Chaim Parshas Kiseitze. He describes the neshama HaKadoisho. Is a bas melech malchei amlochim. Yofyo, its beauty. V'zakusa, its purity. V'dakusa, its clarity. Ein l'saper u'leheyomer. It cannot be described. It cannot be retold. And the Rebbe Yisrael didn't give it to any malach except to Klal Yisrael. Tohoirohi, ato voroso, ato yotzarto. You created it. Ato nafachto bi. You blew it into me. When we think of the gift that the Rebbeinu Shalom gave to us, this neshama is the one you are going to return to me by Tchiyas HaMeisim. What kedusha we begin our days with. The Zohar HaKadoshim say that if a person would devote the first hour of his day to kedusha, to living with the Rebbeinu Shalom, his whole day would be a day of kedusha. We wake up and we start our days with an awareness of what the Rabbeinu Shalom gave to us. Whether we begin our days with a shir, whether we begin our days with a davening, whether we begin our days taking off the pajamas on the children and getting them ready to school, whatever it is, we can infuse it with kedusha if we realize and we have the awareness of what just happened to us, what was just put into us, and from where this heilige neshama came. Who are we talking about? Which Yidden have such a neshama? Every single Yid. Even the lowest and the worst amongst us. The Heilige Rishna once says, if a Rasha would know how much Kedusha there is inside him, his stomach would burst from Agas Nefesh if he were to be aware of what's going on inside of him. The Beis Avram writes, just like when you're looking for a margolius, for a pearl, and there's a hard shell around it till you get to it. We are like that hard shell. There's a hard shell, but the harder it is, we know the greater the jewel that's inside it. You know, Rabbi Tzaddik writes in Tzidkas HaTzadik, he writes that if a person has a certain inyan that he finds it's very difficult to him to overcome this Yetzer Hara, and he finds it's very powerful over him, this is a sure sign in Hashemayim that he's roy to be Noki bi Yoiser and to be a great Bal Madrega Dafke in this inyan. And even if there's an Aveda that he's done many, many times, Shehir B'Lip Shoyaboy Yeda, he should know Shu Kli Muchon Liois Noki bi Yoiser B'Zeh. That he is a Kli that's roy, that's worthy of being exceptionally holy in this particular inyan. Because our neshamas are so great, and the Yetzer Hara, who's the biggest maven of all on our neshamas, tries to attack us dafka at our strongest point. It's like the burglar who cases a neighbor, he looks for the biggest mansion that he wants to burglarize. Doesn't go look after the small houses. He wants the nicest house, and when he sees a madrega, he'll do everything in his power to bring him down. So this applies to every single neshama. And what does that mean about our maisim? And we are princes. You know, you could have a slave working on a plantation 15 hours a day. And you could have a prince or a head of state who also works 15 hours a day, doesn't get any sleep, and he doesn't have any privacy, and he's bothered, and nobody leaves him alone. Yet, his work, his avodah, his position is full of satisfaction. A prince, no matter how hard he works, no matter it could be difficult for him sometimes, but he knows he's a prince because he knows that everything he does, even the smallest things, has such broad ramifications. If he shakes hands with another head of state and they smile to each other, that means there's peace between the two countries and the economies are going to boom and everything is going to be fine and they can put down their weapons. And if the prince goes and buys a certain pair of shoes, that means that the next day 2 million people are going to buy the same shoes because they want to wear the shoes that he's wearing. And every little move, he goes here, he stops there, it's in the newspaper, everything has to be retold, everything has to be mefursa. If he came to a certain place, that shows that place is important, or else what would the prince be doing there?
This concludes side 1 of this cassette. Please turn this cassette over for side 2.
So too, Nefesh HaYisrael. A Yid should know that the Oilomois am Hisnagois al Yidei Maise Ha'odom. Our actions are the engine, are the power that move all the Oilomois and that give strength, and that's the Pshat in the Pasuk, Tnu Oiz Leiloikim. It's hard to understand what it means, but that's what it says. The Malachim cannot begin to say Shira until we say Kedusha. We are princes. Every Aver, every Tnuah And this is all of Torah Sa'adam of the Nefesh HaChaim. No Yid should say it in his heart, who am I and what am I that my Maisim or my Midas or my Anhogis or my Diburim should make a difference in the Olamas or Yoinos. There is no Inyan Ba'olam, Yeda, the Yovin, the Yikva b'machshavas libo. He should know deep in his heart, Shekol protoi masav v'diburo b'machshavoisov. Kol eis v'regol lo yisabidu, nothing is lost. Every machshav, every diberu maise, umorabu masov me'oid godol v'romu. How great and powerful are the maisim of a yid. Shekol echos, everyone is oilo, lefi shorsho, lifol pulosa begovei miroimim ba'oilomos, v'tzachzochos ha'oiros ha'elyonis. And lest someone say, it's just talking about hundreds of years ago, when Yidden were Baalei Madrega, this doesn't mean us. It doesn't mean when I get up in the morning and tie my left shoe before the right shoe, I was Mesakin Eilomos. It doesn't mean me, it means the previous generation. Sagen the Heilige Svarim, if it ever meant anything, it means today more than ever. Never before. In Ikvus of the Mashiach, the Loshen of the Noam Elimelech and Pashas Vayeshev, he writes, as the Shechina is in Golus, is a marshal of one who's tired, who's oyev. The Shechina is weary. And only through the tefillas and avodah of Eden in our generation, we can bring koyach, we can awaken. He gives the marshal of a choyle who's so weak and faint, and you bring to him smelling salt, and that awakens him. That's the effect that our tefillas, that's the effect that our maisim toivim have in the Olamas or Elyonos. The Beis Aaron writes, what tzaddikim or rishonim took months to accomplish, in Ikvus of the Mashiach you can accomplish it in 1 hour. Because the Sitra Achra is so powerful, the Tumah is so great, and the Sionis are so awful. Perhaps in Gashmias, in our physical world, things are going well for us. We don't see soldiers, no stormtroopers out on the street trying to shoot us. But in every street corner, one walks into a store, one walks into a candy store, there are Nazi soldiers on the bookshelves trying to shoot his neshama down. He puts on his computer, Rahman al-Itzlan, in the electricity, in the air, in the atmosphere. We're in danger. We're living in nisyonis, in garochniusik nisyonis that no Yid ever lived through since Brias Ha'olam. And in such a generation, to say an Erlich Shema Yisrael, to turn to the Rabbi Shalom with a sincerity, with an emes. Oiv Yisrael Dapterov said it in his generation. He said, we are what we are, and we're very far from the previous generation. Aber oif mein Wort, he said, take my word. From Brias Ha'olam, since Brias Ha'olam, the Rabbi Shalom never had such nachas like he has from us. That's what he said 250 years ago. Yes, we can give nachas to the Borei Olam. With sincerity, with ehrlichkeit, with midos toivos, being kovish our Yetzirah in such a time of nisyonos. Bonim atem l'Hashem. What does it mean to be a child of the Rabbeinu Shalom? Like a father, delights, he plays. Yeled Shashum Aben Yakil Ephraim. Yeled Shashum, we are his delightful plaything. The Shem Yishmuel says, like a child who's too small to understand what a father is. But he calls out, Abba, Abba, he calls out Father, and his father sweeps him up in his arms. He's so delighted. He called me Father. He reckons, he doesn't understand what Satata is. A very shofmei Tatata. But the very fact that he's calling out to his father brings out such a habit. Whether we know what the Rabbeinu Shalom, but we're taka very far. But Ayid Ruf Tois Abba Abba. The Medrash in Shir Hashirim on the Pasuk Hashmini as Koilech. The Medrash brings a marshal to a king who hadn't heard from his daughter in a long time. And he knew she was coming toward the palace, so he stationed his guards there to ambush her. And when she was going on the road, they jumped out and they attacked her, and she started to cry, Abba, Abba, Father, Father. And he came and he said, that's all I wanted to hear. It's sweet by the Rabbeinu Shalom when we call out to him, Abba, Abba. And sometimes he'll even give us petch just to hear those words from our mouth. Just so we should say, Tata Zisa. The Chazon Ish said, what's tefillah? The Rabbeinu Shalom wants that the Chazon Ish, when you need a pair of new shoes, you should say, Bashmanesa, Tata Zisa, I need shoes. That's what he wants to hear from us. Bonim, we're his children. And when we're bitzar, when things go difficult for us, what does it say in the Gemara? You know, sometimes when someone's in trouble, he says, don't tell my parents. I don't want my parents to know. They'll have tzar. And the Rabbeinu Shalom, who loves us more, our parents are just a mashal for the Rabbeinu Shalom. So we should have an idea how much he loves us. The state in Chazal, when he is bitzad, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kolani meroishi, kolani mezroi, imay anoichi bitzar, it means every single type of tzar. The Ramban writes, there are many tzars, there are great tzars, and there are difficulties, there are presses, there are stresses. The normal everyday stresses of life of the Ramban is also tzars, where the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kolani meroishi, I'm with you, my entire kind, I wish it would go easier for you. For whatever reason it is now, it cannot be that way, but you're my child. And when a father comes home and he sees his child running towards him, and excuse me, he needs to be changed. Does he say, I don't want to know him? He says to the mother, quickly change him so I can hug him again. And when we come to the Rabbeinu Shalom, and sometimes we're maluchlich bechet, so the Rabbeinu Shalom says, you know, tshuva in the Sifrei Kabbalah is called ima. Bina, ima, ilah. This steht in the Chassidische Svarim. He says to tshuva, he says to ima, tovei haim v'tikon echsayas b'no. Clean him up quickly so I can hug him again. And from being metuah v'meshuketz, as the Rambam writes, he comes in one moment to be a ohu v'nechmod, beloved by the Rabbeinu Shalom. He wants us. V'ato mishamra b'kirbi. The Rabbeinu Shalom is mishamar our neshama. You know what it means? He's mishamar our neshama. The Rabbi Chaim says, our neshamas come from such a makor nifle, from such a pnimius b'kemakor, that all the time the neshama is longing, is yearning to go back to the Rabbeinu Shalom. He's jumping out. V'ato mishamra b'kirbi. If not for the fact that Rabbeinu Shalom would keep our neshamas in our guf, he contains them in our guf, they would run away. You know, sometimes when a little child comes banging at night in his parents' room, he wants to come in and sleep with them. And the mother says, no, go back to your bed, you're too big, you can't come in. And he bangs again. I remember once in Eretz Yisrael, I was in an aunt's house, and the little boy, they were trying to train him to stay in his bed at night and not go into his pants at night. And they said, look, you're too big, you can't come in. And he said, Aval ima ani hamotek shelach. I'm your sweetie. What happened? Why don't you want to have me? Our neshamas are like that. They keep on knocking on the door of the Rabbeinu Shalom. Take us to you. And the Rabbeinu Shalom says, no, go back to your room. Go back to your guf. Ato mishamro b'kirbi. But HaMelech says, Hashem negdecha kol tavosi, v'anchosi mimcho loy nistorach. The Rabbeinu Shalom knows all my taivas, all my desires. And my anochas, my sighing, my krechzing is not hidden from you. And one would wonder, perhaps it would make more sense to say the other way around. The taivas are what one does when no one sees. Tavosi mimcho loy nistorach. You know everything that's hidden. The anochas, Yom Kippur, Meklap Talchet, that's negdecha kol anchosi. Two things the Yid has to know. There's nothing hidden from the Rabbeinu Shalom. Negdecha kol tavosi. Imagine if somebody were to tell you, there was a newsletter that just came out and your name was mentioned there. There's about 3 lines. You would run to go see what do they write about me. And if someone would tell you that in this week's newspaper, even a Yiddish newspaper is enough, there's an article about you. Oy, you'd run to see what does it say. And imagine if someone tell you they wrote a book about you, there's a biography, it's all the stores, and you'd run, you say, no, let me see it, what they write about. You take out the book and you start reading every single thing you ever did wrong, with pictures, mit alles, from Yoimi Volde. Who wrote this book? What are we going to do? There is such a book. Chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtovim. When we come up to Shamayim, every deed is recorded. Mazel, it's like the person who comes and he sees it before it went out to the publisher. And he could say quickly, I want it recalled. A Yid on Kolzman Shanashama B'Kirbi, a Yid can turn to the Bush, he could erase, he could tear out pages, he could do tshuva, he can rewrite the book himself. They'll let you write it yourself. You write it yourself. So that's Negdecha Kol Kavod. But Va'an Chosi Mimcho Lo